but the people who are Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks so much for tuning in to our Literary Agents panel with Lisa Gallagher and Christopher Schelling. I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then get out of the way. Both Lisa and Christopher are veterans of the conference. They've both come multiple times. I believe Christopher has been there every year except our first year. And they're very, very popular. And whenever they speak at the conference, it's a packed house. Lisa, and correct me if I'm mispronouncing the name of your company, DeFiore?
DeFiore.
Works at DeFiore and Company Literary Management. She's been an agent for over 25 years. Prior to that, she was a publisher at William Morrow and Bloomsbury USA. Among her clients, we have Christopher Moore, Charles Todd, Molly Bloom. Those of you who have seen the movie Molly's Game probably know Molly Bloom. And I actually just discovered that you represent Hank Philippi Ryan.
That is true.
Yeah, she's terrific. I did a reading with her last year in Manchester, in Massachusetts, and she's terrific.
She is terrific.
And Christopher Schelling, as I said, has been coming to the conference every year since year 2. He is the founder and CEO of Selectric Artists Literary Management Agency. He used to be an editor at Dutton and HarperCollins. And he represents, among others, Augustine Burroughs, Rainbow Rowell, Haven Kamel, Cinda Williams Chima. Am I saying Chima?
Yep, correct.
And me.
Hey!
So thanks so much, guys, for coming in and agreeing to do this, and take it away.
Great. Thanks, Tom. So,
hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I will pass this to Christopher to kick off in a second. But just to say, we thought we would talk about generally what agents do and the role of an agent in the whole business, and then invite questions from the audience so that we can actually be very specific about what you would like to know. So, Christopher, would you like to kick off?
Sure. I mean, I think it's interesting that both you and I come from the editorial side. I think that's where many agents began. I think sometimes it's the most interesting just to sort of talk about what it is that we do. It can be a little amorphous from the outside, I think. I mean, first of all, I would say that, as far as what I'm looking for on my list, I'm a generalist. I have fiction and nonfiction of all stripes for children and for adults. So I feel that every day is different. It helps keep, change things up in that way. And how about you, Lisa? What's the composition of your list? Sort of fiction, nonfiction?
I mean, I would say I am also a generalist, and it is a mix. The great thing about being an agent is if you read something and you have a great vision for who the audience is, and very importantly, which editors you think would actually like this project, you're free to represent whatever you like. As a former publisher, one gets to be known for certain successes, and then it's very easy to come to accounts and booksellers and say, hey, I was the publisher of Dennis Lehane or Marley and Me, and they know that you know what you're talking about in that regard. So, but you do become known for what you're good at, and the same is true as an agent, that you're known by your successes. But at the same time, if you have a vision for something that would not necessarily be right in your wheelhouse, I work for my clients. I'm free to take on any project that I'm passionate about, that I have a vision for. I don't have to ask anyone. I don't have to get permission. I work for my clients. And I think that's a very important thing to remember about agents, that the writers don't work for us, we work for them.
That's exactly right. I mean, they rely on us for our expertise and our contacts and, all of the industry things, but we make our living as a percentage of their living. That is very clear. So it's a nice collaboration, but when it comes down to it, we are the business people that they employ.
So Christopher's right. When I became an agent, after being a publisher, I very deliberately chose a financial model that meant I got paid when my clients got paid, which means, an agent does a deal with a publishing house. The contract is in the author's name, care of the agency, and the publisher pays the money to the agency. We take off our commission, and then the rest of that money is paid straight through to the client. So I always thought that it was a great incentive to have my, my fiscal fortune tied to my clients. The better job I do for my clients, the better it is for me too. So I really liked having that incentive.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about the ways in which we find clients. I think it probably for both of us, it comes in both directions. That I'm open to submissions. All the information is on the Selectric Artists website. So people are free to get in touch that way. I also do a good amount of reading and looking for writers with interesting ideas and things that could be expanded into books, or if it's a voice that I feel might have something to say on another topic. So at this point, I would say it's probably 60% come through the regular querying me method, and 40%, it's close to half and half. How about with you?
So certainly I have taken on clients who, sent in a submission without me knowing them or without us having anything in common. That certainly happens. And then I've also taken on clients who either know clients of mine or know people in the industry who I may have worked with. I may have just got to know them from going to conferences, from being around. There'll be some of the other presenters at the conference I've never published, I've never worked with, and yet I've known them for a good number of years at this point. And sometimes they will email and say, listen, I read something and, I think this person's very talented. Would you like to take a look? So it does come in both ways. I also represent 3 or 4 journalists who actually collaborate with subjects who are not primarily writers. So sometimes they're celebrities, sometimes they might be, a businessman who has a full-time job and could actually write this book, but it will never get done if we have to wait for it to be done, in between times. So I do represent a number of journalists as well. So that does add a lot of variety, because very often in those situations, I don't represent the subject, and it will be other agents who come to me to ask about the availability of my clients. So I love having a very eclectic mix. And I've always said that being in publishing is like the ongoing education of Lisa Gallagher, because you're always learning something new. And, I feel like for 10 minutes at least, I could probably hold a conversation about anything at this point.
That's worth a lot.
Yes, it is indeed. So do you want to talk a little bit, Christopher, about if there are audience members who are trying to select agents and where they might look to, to kind of come up with names?
I think probably the smartest way to do it is, well, first of all, if you want to get published, if you want to be a published writer, you have to be a reader. You have to be reading a lot, and you have to be reading a lot in the category that you're writing in. So when you read a published book, look at the back at the acknowledgments and see who the author names. Sometimes it will say, my agent so-and-so. Sometimes it's just a list of names and you have to Google. But that you can start compiling a list there, and you may find that there's one agent who has 2 or maybe 3 of the writers you like the most. sometimes that will be, it can tell you that this is someone who is definitely open to the subject matter, the genre, whatever you're in. It can also be the case that that agent has enough of that thing already because you're reading their client's book. But it's a very good place to start.
I would agree, and I think that that's probably the best and easiest place to start, because you could literally check books out of the library and look in the back. This is not something that will cost a great deal of money. It doesn't have to cost any money at all. The other very useful tool I would suggest, because as Christopher mentioned, sometimes an agent, especially if they've been in the business a long time, may have a very full client list and not be taking on very many new clients. So there is an industry newsletter called Publishers Marketplace. And for, I think it's $20 a month, you can buy a subscription, and they have a section called deals. And it goes by category. So you could look up, say, mystery and thriller, and actually pull up a list of all the deals that have been reported with the editors, who are not primarily your concern right now, but more importantly with the agents who have done those deals. So that actually gives you a way to maybe match up some of the names you've researched in the acknowledgements with agents who are still actively doing deals in this area. So I find that an invaluable resource myself sometimes, just to make sure that there isn't a young up-and-coming editor who I should be aware of when I'm actually going out with a new project. And you don't have to actually log into that, pay that subscription until you're actually at the point where you want to find your agent. So when you have all your material, and we'll come back to this in a second, all your material in the best possible shape it can be, and you're ready to go, that's when you get your month's subscription, so that you can cancel it after you've done your month of research.
Yeah, that's a valuable tool both within the industry and for writers looking for information. And yeah, it's the 21st century. Everything is Googleable. I do as much research as possible. The last thing you want to do is approach an agent who distinctly does not do the thing that you are doing. That it's just a waste of everyone's time. So just as much research as you can do, and there's so much information that's out there now.
And most agents would have a submissions page on their website. And I would urge you, when you have the list finalized, I would urge you to look up what each agent says about how they like submissions, because they could be very, very different. So if an agent says they want a Word document, which is what I would say, there's a good reason for that. And it's because I like to be able to manipulate the font, that my eyes aren't getting any better. And if you want me to read your material and be comfortable while doing so, it's kind of best to follow that advice. So my submissions page also kind of apologizes and says, if you haven't heard within 6 weeks, it may be that, I can't offer you representation at this time, and I won't be writing to you to let you know that. And that's not because I'm a terrible human being whose mother didn't bring me up properly. It's because there just isn't. There are only 24 hours in every day. And unfortunately, it's not always possible to write to everyone. You would be amazed at the volume of submissions. So I don't want you to think that somehow the agent you've queried is inhuman or just terrible, but it is a fact of life. And I do believe that with perseverance, you will get a response.
Yeah, I have the same note on my website, and I mean it really is. It's one of the heartbreaks of doing this, that there are so many people and you just can't get back to everyone. Same with Lisa. I try, but that can be tough. So let's talk briefly about what physically what we're looking at. I mean, in terms of like when there's a fiction submission. I mean, I know I'm certainly looking for a complete manuscript, especially, I mean, with a debut writer, without question. Nonfiction, well, we can address that later because that's usually a platform issue. But fiction-wise, I mean, do you look at partials? Do you consider that at all?
Again, with debut writers, it's not to say that there haven't been fabulous deals made for debut writers who they've been done on a partial, but they're the outliers, really. It happens very, very rarely. And as with anything that's an outlier, it tends to get a lot of noise, which gives the impression that it's done a lot, and it really isn't. So I would say, absolutely, for fiction, I would want to see a completed manuscript. And by that, I mean, when you get to the end of your first draft, give yourself permission to put it away somewhere and let, 2 or 3 weeks pass without even looking at it, and then pull it out and really start at the beginning and start revising and start making it better. Because I will say that whilst I sometimes do read for my clients, I'll read the same manuscript several times. When you're querying an agent, the most powerful read will always be that first read. So you want that manuscript to be in the best possible shape, and you want the title to be the best possible title. Titles are eye-catching, they should be. So, in the subject line, if that's your well thought out and very eye-catching title, that might be enough for an agent to open that email as opposed to the hundreds of others that are crossing the transom.
Exactly. I mean, titles can be tough. So if you have a great one, you're ahead of the pack. I mean, a lot of times during the publication process, titles will change. Especially, I think, with nonfiction, and subtitles are added and things, but it happens with fiction as well. But if you can go in and pitch with that perfect title, I mean, that's the thing that makes someone open that document right away.
And then the other thing that the other thing that you should include in your submission is a submission letter. And I think even though most agents, and certainly I'm speaking for myself, especially, I don't accept any physical submissions at all anymore. I mean, apart from the fact that the last time I was in my office was, a good 6 months ago. Even when I was in the office, you're sending your manuscript as an attachment to an email. Keep the submission letter as concise as you possibly can, i.e., if you were to print it off, it would fit on a regular piece of 8 by 11. As laid out like a letter. So, the elements of a submission letter to an agent, or a query letter, they're sometimes called. First of all, make sure that you're addressing the agent by their name, and make sure that you're querying every agent you're querying one person at a time. There is nothing that makes a person feel more special than being BCC'd with nearly every other agent you've ever met in your life. So, you want to open that email and it say, "Dear Lisa," if it's me, "Dear Christopher." And I have opened emails where it said, "Dear Bruce," or something, which all that says to me is that somebody is sloppy. And I don't want to go into business with sloppy people. Christopher, do you want to jump in and talk about the other elements of a pitch letter?
Sure. I mean, I will say that I too would like a query letter. I also as concise as possible. Tell me what it is, maybe a sentence or two of plot. I really don't, I don't want to know sort of a chunk of plot. I don't need the piece of it that sounds like the jacket copy. And then a short bio. And I feel like that is enough, telling me the kind of book that it is, and just sort of what that, elevator pitch log line is. I I know there are a lot of agents who say, send the query letter. They then may request a partial, then they may request a full. I just say attach a full manuscript. It's sort of that way. When I go through, if it's something that catches my eye, I can flip through. I can download. We don't have to go the extra step. You don't have to wait for that. I've never had a problem with a file in that way. And I feel like, part of the reason for that is also when an agent says send the first, 3 chapters, I think that first 50 pages, getting started is the hardest part. And yeah, if you've also, along with the title, if you've got a killer first sentence, you're really pulling people along. But there are also times where I can recognize the talent, but it's just things don't get started quickly enough. So the letter itself isn't really that representative of the work because it's written in a different voice. It's you pitching it. And then perhaps that opening chunk is also not necessarily representative of it. So I definitely say just send me the complete manuscript and we'll work from there.
Absolutely. So I would say, we've talked about an elevator pitch. For those of you who don't know, the idea was that, the sales guy would have his idea ready for the boss if he happened to step onto the elevator and the guy only had 1 floor to pitch the idea. So it really is a sentence, and it should encapsulate what the challenge is for the protagonist. It should encapsulate as much as possible what this book is about. And it's really, really hard to write a great elevator pitch, but it is worth doing. Partly because if somebody asks you what your book is about, you cannot start rambling on about the plot. But it's also useful to have it as a submission in the submission letter to grab attention. And that's really what that is for. But to Christopher's point, so much about this job and about reading and about whether one falls in love with something, it really is about how it is on the page. So the read is incredibly important. So I would put the time in to make sure that all your material, whether it's the first sentence, the first paragraph, the full manuscript, the submission/pitch letter, make sure that all of those are the absolute best they can be. And I think Jennifer had asked a question about at what point are you ready to start looking for an agent? And I would say definitely not until all of those things are absolutely tip top and you cannot make them any better than they are. And that does include putting the material to one side and then coming back to it and really revise.
Yes, I feel like the biggest issue with the biggest problem with querying is sending out too soon. It's also possible to just keep revising, and that's its own problem. But you can also feel when it gets to a place where it's at the best that it can be, maybe without the help of a professional after that. So I think I think Lisa is exactly right. Set it aside, give yourself a little bit of a break from it, and go back and revise.
And then with nonfiction, it's true to say that with memoir, because memoir has so much in common with fiction, if you think about the narrative arc, and a memoir is not, I was born and this is my whole life. Memoir is very selective about which moments one includes and which moments are deleted. So memoir, I have certainly as a publisher acquired memoir with the whole manuscript right there. And that would have been the case for John Grogan's Marley and Me. So it definitely happens. But most often, nonfiction is acquired by publishers and therefore by agents in terms of queries, what's called a proposal. So a proposal would give you, an overview of the book, so one gets a sense of what this book is and why you are uniquely qualified to write it. Then it would also give some, kind of information about you. It would actually give a chapter by chapter short summaries so that we can get a sense of the narrative arc. And then most importantly, there would be a chapter or two of sample material, because as I say, fiction or nonfiction, how it reads on the page is absolutely key. Even if it's the best idea in the world, if the execution is terrible, then it's not going to work.
The one factor then that is also there with nonfiction these days, of course, is platform. The sort of what sort of media attention you have, who you are as the expert in your field on this issue. And that, I feel like, is almost even with the quality of the writing. If you have a brilliant proposal, but you don't have a solid platform, you haven't been published before, you aren't really known for what it is that you're writing about, that is nearly impossible these days. The bigger the platform, the easier it is for the agent to pitch. They see that the publisher can see that there's a built-in audience for this. And in some ways, then the book serves as merch. A lot of times it's not even necessarily a celebrity, but a person who has a business and, is known for something else, and the book is supplemental.
So let's talk about a few things that fall under that headline of platform, because I know it's a word that's bandied around a lot. Examples of platform from one extreme to the other. It could be that, somebody has an NPR show. Obviously, that is a way to reach readers. Publishers understand that to Christopher's point, there's a built-in audience. It could be that somebody has an enormous social media platform, and by that, it's not unusual for certain celebrities to have millions of Instagram followers. But obviously that's not necessarily for everyone. So your platform could be that you have been published in and list the literary magazines that you've managed to be published in. It could be that you've attended this conference. I mean, this shows a commitment to wanting to get better at your craft. And I think that would be, something to note. Writers who you've worked with could also be included in terms of, if you've been lucky to work with some of the people, as you will have done by the end of this conference, it may be that one of them was very encouraging about what you did, and that might be something to say too. So please don't think that unless you have, a gazillion social media followers or a TV show, that there's no way to kind of do everything you can to build that platform. If you're an academic, obviously that's another thing to say. Are there others that I've missed, Christopher?
And I think just as many publication credits as you can get on that topic, which also always shows a writer who's willing to do the work. I mean, because we know the rejection rate is very high. So if somebody in their query letter says to me, I've been published in these, 3 or 4 journals, even if I haven't necessarily heard of them or, know them well, I know that means this is somebody who you don't just send out one query and get an acceptance. Usually, this is somebody who's been doing the work, who is willing to face the rejection and keep going until they get one, they get a few, they start building a following that way. So there's a way that whatever kind of publication credits you can rack up, and also if there's anything you can do locally. I mean, I know, the world has changed so much. It used to be like, well, if there's, a local paper and you could, start volunteer, try to write a column for them, try to do these things. That's not really such an option anymore. But I think as much involvement as you can show that you've had on your topic that sort of made you an expert in it, the better.
And a final point on platform, just before we really do open things up to questions. I saw Alexandra had asked a question about how do you suggest someone build a bigger platform? There's no single answer to that. And if there were, I would be a billionaire because I could be building platforms for everyone and doing many, many more deals as a result. So there isn't one single answer on that, but you know, as many ways as you can think of. We've mentioned a few of them here. So should we open up to, we have 15 minutes left. Should we open up to specific questions?
Sure.
So Rose is saying, what is the biggest piece of advice you would give to writers? I would say persevere, be tenacious. If you are, I think you have to show commitment to your craft. You have to show that you're willing to get better and put those hours in. And I think that really you have to ask yourself, do I have to write? Am I have to write, otherwise I don't feel like I'm alive. I mean, you literally have to want to write that much to develop the tenacity that will help you get to where you want to be. If you just wake up one morning and think, hey, I'll write a bestseller, unless you're the luckiest person in the world, that's not going to work. You really do have to show commitment.
Yeah, and I said before, and read. You have to read everything that you can, and then write the book that you want to read that nobody else has written yet. That's where you'll find your voice.
So Jordan is asking, do you have any advice on how to move past rejection and not get discouraged? What I would say is, you know, remember that agents are only human. Meaning, you know, they could just have a lot on their plates right now. It's not personal. You know, for an agent, this is a business. This is how we make money. You've heard us say that we don't get paid until we actually sell something and our clients get paid. So we have to be very careful about what we take on, because if we spend a lot of time on something and don't sell it, then that's time that can't be recouped. And so I would say that, you know, back to the question of tenacity, remember that there could be a myriad reasons why an agent has passed on your manuscript that may or may not, unfortunately, be anything to do with the manuscript itself. So I would just say, don't give up, keep querying. Remember that it's not personal. Remember that this is a business, and it could just be that particular agent has way too much going on right now to take on a new client.
Right. Yeah. It really does have a lot to do with that, and it's also what we're looking for. You know, the one thing. And it may necessarily be, you may feel that way. I'm not saying this well. You may feel that that's the connection that you have made. It's always just personal taste. It's not a personal issue. It's that it's not right for me. It's not saying this is not right for publishing. Maybe in fact, the next person that you query is in fact going to connect with it in a way. I try to give it's 100% subjective. So if you make that connection with somebody, that's great. And the agent then also reads in keeping in mind, oh, I could send this out to these editors. They have a feeling that this could be commercial. So I would say at any point that you feel that, you know, the personal rejection, it's just not right for that one person. So just keep going.
And I always feel that if I'm not the perfect advocate for something, it's actually only right that I should step back and allow that writer to find the person who is the best champion, because frankly, this business is hard enough as it is. You need someone who shares your vision, also has a vision for exactly the right editors to send it to. And if somebody passes, I think you really just have to say, unfortunately, that person wasn't my champion, but my champion could still be out there.
Right. And I feel that same way with editor. I mean, we face rejection as well. We send the author's project out and the rejections come through us.
So Noah is asking, sorry, the question just flashed away, but Noah is asking, do you think working with an agent is better than submitting to literary magazines by yourself. I think both are equally valid, depending on what stage that you're at. So I have clients who still submit to literary magazines, their short stories, the things that it doesn't make sense from a fiscal point of view to get involved in necessarily. And obviously when they're ready to have something submitted to a publisher, then that's where I come in. So I always think kind of use me for what you can't do yourself. And the things you can do yourself, as long as you're keeping an agent in the loop or you're working towards querying an agent, you know, those things go ahead and do. It doesn't, as Christopher says, it doesn't hurt to have a list of places you've been published.
Right. And it's not an either or. Almost all of my clients continue to submit to journals and magazines on their own.
So let's just have a look. So Jennifer's asking about self-publishing. So I think that the thing to say about self-publishing is, in one way, it's very democratic because anybody can publish anything very easily and put it out there. And again, back to that idea that one always hears about the outliers and not about the thousands and thousands of other people who, you know, found it very hard. You know, we hear about the people who had these incredible self-publishing experiences and then were picked up by, you know, a major house. You know, yes, I would look at somebody who had been self-published, but I would want to see really big numbers in terms of those sales, because a publisher is going to look at something that's self-published and kind of say, well, okay, so, you know, there were 100,000 copies sold, but were they sold at 99 cents? Because publishers, apart from short stories, maybe as digital first, don't publish books for 99 cents. So they want to see that that self-published author has an audience who is willing to pay money for the next book they write that the publisher would publish. The other thing is, once you self-publish, you have a sales track. So it would be, it's not helping you necessarily to have self-published and only sold a handful of books, which sadly is the case for most self-published, the majority of self-published authors. Selling a couple of hundred books is not going to be a path to getting a major publisher on board.
But then it also can supply the satisfaction of, if you just want to have your book published and you want to have copies of it and you want to get it out to your friends and your family, that's great. Once you've done that, it's not a vehicle then to use to get it published. The publisher is going to look at the sales of that and say, okay, maybe if there are 100 sales, that's everybody, you know, that was the first flush of things. They can't really work with that. So it's not a tool that you can then use to get further publication. It's an end in itself.
Eduardo is asking, whilst trying to publish, should he mention that disclose that English is not his native language? I would say that because we're working primarily in the English language and the major publishing houses here in the US are publishing primarily in English. If you're writing in English, you want to be sure that it's well written and it reads well on the page. But I would say that make the fact that you speak one or more languages, make that a virtue. Because knowing that somebody is, I have several clients who are native Spanish speakers, and that is a selling point in as much as publishers know that you know, they may be able to publish in English and in Spanish. So I have certainly done deals with major houses, in fact 2 since the pandemic started, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but hey, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I've actually done 2 deals for the deal is in English and in Spanish. So those publishers will publish as close to simultaneously as possible in both. But even if, say, you spoke Italian or French, you should mention that, because a publisher then knows that should they secure an Italian publisher for your novel, it could be a real selling point that that author can promote in Italian, which not every American writer who's published in Italy can do. So I would try and turn it into a plus rather than thinking of it as a negative.
I agree. Don't phrase it as English is not my native language, but I'm polylingual.
So are there any more questions? Okay, how can I get over, this is Amaya, is that the way to pronounce your name, Amaya? I hope so. How to get over a creative slump when writing fiction poetry. Inspiration ebbs and flows tremendously sometimes. I can write a brilliant pitch letter, but I have never, ever tried to write a novel. So I might not be the best person to answer this, but I do have clients who say that the brain can't work in flow mode, meaning flowing the words to the page, and edit mode at the same time. So sometimes, think of it as, I've heard writers talk about it as, a dirty first draft or a messy first draft. Just forget that you're trying to make it the best it can be, and just make yourself write for 10 minutes and see what you can put on the page, even if it's like blah, 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 blah. And then you can go back and actually make it better. That might be a way to get the flow started again, because I think that's what, when I think about creative slumps, it's the flow gets a little blocked because you're trying too hard to make it right the minute those words hit the page.
Right. Yeah. Write every day. Just get your butt in the chair. Make that much of a commitment. Don't let it be an adversarial relationship. And the other thing is, sometimes when there are other activities, washing dishes or gardening or whatever, think about your work in a different environment than staring at the screen. I mean, not that a lot of writers do that. You live with your work all the time, but focus on it while there's sort of a mindless task, and kind of let that try to crack something new open.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, just to sometimes stop trying and see what happens. So I think we have time for one last question. So I'm going to take Paige's about, I talked about receiving submissions through writers. And Paige was asking, should she be, the word she used was mining those contacts during the writing process. I would just say that every contact you make through your writing process, including each other, remember that one of you will be published before others of you, perhaps. So as you are going through this process, not only do you want to start forming networks of other writers so that you can support each other and be beta readers, any writer who you work with and you make a connection with, and definitely don't lose any of those contacts. I wouldn't necessarily call it mining. That probably feels a tad aggressive, but I'm joking. But certainly anyone you meet who could be helpful, whether it's your local librarian, whether it's your local bookstore, independent bookstores, as long as you're there being supportive and understanding that they're in business too. I've certainly had submissions from booksellers who I've known for years.
Yeah, definitely. Any contacts that you make, and if a relationship sort of blossoms from that. I mean, I also know a lot of times there are writers who contact other writers admiring their work, and they're kind of at the same level, and they end up reading each other's work in progress. So almost, establishing a relationship where they've sort of formed a writer's group. So it's not always just like for the end result. Sometimes something surprising can happen in the meantime.
Yeah, sometimes things come in publishing, in writing, as in life, from the most unexpected places. So, be engaged as a reader, someone who's in your local community. Not that any of us are getting out of the house much these days, but, just bear that in mind, because this too shall pass.
Yes, I will say the most recent book that I sold came from someone who used to work in publishing, who I haven't been in contact with for a couple years. And she wrote, and her subject line was, "I'll bet all the girls say this to you." And the first line was, "I wrote a book." And it turned out to be fantastic. So there you have it. Comes from a very unexpected place.
Well, I think that's our time up. So thank you again for joining us in this session. And I hope the rest of the conference is a terrific experience. Certainly, my experience at Sanibel has always been wonderful. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you to Tom DeMarchi and to Tom C. and Margaret behind the scenes. It's been great. Take care.
Take care, everyone.